Hi, welcome to the Say Amandla project, and we're here today to discuss the legal protections, freedoms, and rights entrenched in South Africa's constitution and try to explore these within the context of the day-to-day lives of people of sexual and identity diversity. I have with me today Simon, Londiwe and Boitumelo, and we shall be exploring some of these different perspectives within the context of modern-day South Africa. So, thank you very much for joining us. The first question I'd like to ask is, what is your definition or your perception of discrimination in South Africa? What is the reality for people who are in environments that aren't necessarily conducive or understanding or tolerant of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity persons?
I think I would say that if you treat somebody unfairly, simply because of what you think their gender is, and not giving them the same treatment that you'd give a person who you consider straight or who you consider normal or what is the norm. So unequal treatment of any kind I would consider as discrimination is.
The reality is, as much as we have all these rights in South Africa and everything, the reality is when you get there to the hospital, you're treated differently. There's always that element of difference that you feel you're not the same as the person next to you or whatever. So that's discrimination on its own.
So now, in the context of social media, there's been so much that has been happening within the space of education, within the space of race. Where does SOGI come into that picture when you think about it?
When you think about it, in a lot of these situations, in terms of discrimination, in terms of discrimination and the intersectionality thereof, a lot of the time you find that where the LGBTI is concerned, there's a lot of invisibility, there's a lot of erasure. So we are part of the struggle most of the time, but we may not necessarily be as acknowledged. So even if you think of how people talk about the democracy and development of the democracy, they will talk about your Nelson Mandela's, your Thabo Mbekis and whatnot, but they very rarely talk about your Simon Mmeyi and your Pevditiers, who, although gay, lesbian, or otherwise identifying, were paramounts to the struggle as well. I mean, if you think about Simon Mmeyi and how he basically single-handedly, a black man, united black and whites within the gay community, which wasn't necessarily possible in the past because of laws and segregation and all that, and it was apartheid. He brought together everybody under the Gay and Lesbians of Wits movement, and he started what we now know as the Gay and Lesbian Pride Parade, then it was known as the Lesbian and Gay Pride March. That was all him, but when people refer to history and things like that, a lot of the people who are part of the LGBTI community get erased. So that in itself is a discriminatory act if you think about it, because it's almost like your efforts are in vain. It almost feels as though your blackness is good enough, but you as a sexual being with sexuality is not. So there's a lot of erasure, I feel.
So I'd like to explore, in the context of today, how do you access justice as a SOGI person in South Africa?
Well, I feel like it's with Equality Court that we have now. It makes it much easier because you don't need a lawyer, first of all, and you get protection order so much quicker than any other court. So it makes it easier, but then we just need people just need to be informed about it. It's there, but then people just don't use it because they don't know about it.
And then just to delve a little deeper, there are a lot of feminists across Africa who love, the gender movement, so to speak, and they're very passionate about it. But you find that when trans persons, as well as lesbian women, are included in that conversation, there isn't such a strong sentiment. Why do you think that and that's somewhat a bit of a reflection of our day-to-day lives, when we're looking at the actual LGBTI plus movement, you don't see that visibility that you're talking about. So why do you think there's that level of compounded intersectionality within the feminist movement or in activism generally?
I'm not sure I'd call it compounded intersectionality, it's more exclusion. Whereas we need to push for the intersectionality that you're mentioning. That technically should be the ideal, right? Your movements such as feminism and your equality movements, they should be inclusive and not exclusive. And also to backtrack a bit, she mentioned equality courts. as much as we have these structures in place, what we also need to have is people within those spaces, people operating there. So your lawyers or your legal representatives or your medical healthcare professionals need to be sensitive to the issues of the LGBTI people, so that people who fall within that spectrum and within the community, who belong to the community, are more comfortable accessing those services, because there's nothing worse than hearing stories about how somebody tried to go and get treatment, let's say maybe you have some kind of sexual infection, sexually transmitted infection, and you're uncomfortable going to the clinic because now the sister on duty will be questioning them. But why are you engaging in such things? Why can't you just be like other kids and find a man or find a woman or whatever respective opposite gender or sex to you? So we need to have people who are aware of what's really going on out there, who are aware of the LGBTI and are able to deal with those people accordingly, because it is quite sensitive. This is who people are. It's not necessarily a choice.
For instance, when you go to the hospital with an STD or something, if you're lesbian or gay, them saying that, oh, why can't you just do this? I don't think they're trying to say that, oh, what you do. What they believe that they're not trying to tell you what to do with your life, but then it's actually that. But then it's how they've been programmed. You know, socialization goes a long way. If you were raised in a family where you taught that, you know what, you need to treat every human being as equal, then you're gonna grow up that way. But if you still, you know, you grow up and then you think that, you know what, there's only two genders, you're female, you're male, that's it. And I think they need to be taught how to get out of that mindset.
But I mean, we're talking about, 20 years after democracy. We're talking about 2016, a day and age of information. We're talking about visibility, when you talk in the olden days, Will and Grace, Modern Family. But now we are in 2016, yet there's still people who don't have a basic understanding of what sexual orientation and gender identity is. Why?
I think that happens because you've mentioned now your references, first of all, white, American, your Will and Grace, your Modern Families.
Wow.
So that's the issue. There's not that much visibility with the black queer body, and especially as an actor, my frustration is that where the black queer body is concerned, we're unicorns. If you look at even now, currently on our national broadcaster, there's programs like your Uzan, where there's like that one gay character is like a unicorn, and there's no dimensionality. They don't show us as human beings. We don't know if this person has a family or anything. There's no love interest, there's no tension. They're just there for comic relief. So it becomes a thing of, it's almost like the LGBTI is an accessory to the heterosexual people, and it's just a jester of sorts. And you even see it in the celebrity culture. A lot of the more your it girls, inverted commas, they have their glam squads, which are made up of presumably predominantly homosexual men, and they seem more as accessories. You don't really know much about them outside of their link to said it girl. It's the makeup artist, it's the hairstylist, it's the designer, it's things like that. So we need more stories, if you will, that are a more honest reflection of the LGBTI community. I mean, the LGBTI community, frankly, is everywhere. We are in politics, we are in the sciences, we aren't just in the arts per se, or we aren't in necessarily the stereotypical professions. And also, yes, we just need to tell more honest and reflective stories. And within these mainstream programs and mainstream programming, we need a more diverse representation of the LGBTI spectrum, because a lot of the time it is restricted to lesbians and gays, which is why sometimes you'll find that a lot of these movements are not able to properly address issues for your trans people, or even me as an agender person. I've never really seen anybody like myself on television, so we need to address those things so that people can know out there, that little child in the townships, whatnot, can know that it's okay to be me. There's nothing wrong with me. What's wrong is everybody else's perception of me, and that tolerance and acceptance are not necessarily enough. I'm a person, I deserve love. We need to learn those things.
Well, if you get your education from TV, you have your view of that gay people are just these people who are just happy, they walk around and they just, not doing anything. But a lot of people who I've met who are homophobic, they say that I do not want to be sitting with a guy who's going to be checking me out. But see, the problem is, he's not checking you out. What makes you think that he's looking at you and checking you out and doing all these things? I mean, if you're a guy and then you like a girl, it's normal for you to be looking at them in some sort of way, but it's not okay for a gay guy to come look at you. I don't think that when you're sitting next to a gay guy, they're thinking, oh my God, I want to sleep with that guy. I don't think that's what's going on. They're human.
Yeah.
So I think under education and the fact that people are just living the way that they were raised.
So, let's challenge the narrative. Now, you find a lot of people tend to ask, normal sober persons, the typical questions. So now, what I want to establish is, what's the message that we should give to sober persons in South Africa when someone, for instance, asks, is it natural? Are you really born that way?
I'm trying to decide if I should go politically correct or keep it real. Because to some extent, there's two ways to look at this. First of all, that is very personal information,
Yeah.
And you wouldn't necessarily ask that of somebody who perceives to be heterosexual. So why are you comfortable questioning Dumiso or Londiwe about the same thing? Why are you suddenly so comfortable? And what are you even going to do with that information? Now that you're asking, is it natural? Or thing, like, what are you going to do with that information? What must happen? There's that. But on the other hand, if you are in a position to educate, then by all means do so. But I'd like to believe that you can play it by ear, because there are people who do ask from a place of genuine, I want to learn, I am curious. But then most of the time you find that a lot of the people are just trying to be condescending, or they are trying to they're basically just trying to offend. So it's well-meaning bigotry,
I was just going to have a different take on it. I feel like people fear what they don't know. So if you are able, like, depending on your comfort levels, whatever, but if you're able to educate somebody, just let them know what's going on. Because, the more you don't know about something, the more you fear, the more you just become homophobic.
You shouldn't feel obliged to educate every time and explain, You're not the life orientation teacher, you're also just human. Exactly, like, you're just trying to be you. You're not in that space, you're not necessarily in that space to be disruptive. You're not necessarily there to try and subvert patriarchies or notions of gender. You're not necessarily, you are just there trying to be you. So sometimes, really, the last thing you want to be doing is having to explain yourself. Because I know personally as well, I even get anxiety about it. Because I'm sitting here thinking, I am going to Joburg Central. There will be somebody at North Street Rank who's going to holler at me and hurl insults at me. There is going to be somebody who's going to try and grab at me, or who thinks they have access to my body simply based on the fact that they have perceived me to be a certain way. So sometimes you really just, like, ain't nobody got time for that. You're tired.
So, you find in such situations, it usually accumulates into violence.
Yes.
So how would you advise an individual, given that in some places there isn't a space, in the first place for you to be able to get some level of protection, there isn't a space for you to turn to a support structure. How would you be able to advise someone to deal with such a situation where it might end up resulting in, corrective rape, some form of hate speech, or different form of violence?
See, the problem is, why should women have to protect themselves from rape? Why should women have to say that I can't wear this because a guy, when I pass in the streets, he's gonna try and, get into my pants or something? I think there can never be that thing of, this is the kind of protection that I need. So I think it boils down to have pepper spray, have this and this and this in your bag, but you can never really fully protect yourself. It boils down to, if you know that you're going to walk in a place where it's dangerous, walk with somebody that you trust, or walk away. And sometimes when you walk away, they follow you. Yes. So I don't think there can ever be enough protection for a person to say that I can walk freely and I am free.
And this assumption that a lesbian wants to become a man just because they happen to be a little bit more butch. What's your take on that?
People need to realize that sexual orientation and gender are two separate things. They're two separate entities, they're two separate aspects of a person. So masculinity is not necessarily the sole realm of men. You do not have to be in position of a penis in order to perform masculinity. Gender is a performance. People don't understand that. So gender is a performance. We are taught that as a man, you must walk a certain way. You have to talk a certain way. You even sit a certain way. So for example, this might not necessarily be manly the way we're sitting right now. We're sitting, we're all, it's considered somehow. So because you're sitting this way, instead of it being read as feminine or as a gender presentation, it is read as a sexuality thing. So it's that conflation. So we need people to learn that it's not necessarily like people kind of treat it like a science or a mathematics, if you will. Yeah. So people want to go, oh, he's feminine, he must be gay, which is not necessarily the case. You could probably be a heterosexual person, it just so happens to be feminine. I
actually, we touched on visibility before. So now, in the context of stereotypes, there's the whole notion that gay men are very promiscuous. There's the whole argument that people who are trans are confused. And there's the whole confusion when the story of Caster Semenya came out in the context of her actual. How she would be identified. So within that context, how would you define or how would you elaborate how someone should be able to, address such stereotypes in class or at work? Because in some contexts it can come out as discrimination and someone doesn't realize it.
We had someone come talk to us in our class, and I asked a question about being bisexual, how bisexual people experience discrimination even within the
community.
Exactly. So she was like, what's the best thing is for you to be an activist for what you believe in.
Beyond the stereotypes, beyond the narratives that we've discussed, the one thing that remains certain are the laws in South Africa. And so I'd like us to explore, what does it mean when we talk employment for people who happen to be so gay?
I feel like people need to know that when I come and I go in my CV and I say this is what I can do, they shouldn't judge me based on what they perceive as perfect.
Yeah.
They should just judge me based on what I can bring into the table.
Okay, from a legislative perspective, there are laws protecting the community. There's your Employment Equity Acts, and there's the Constitution as well, that explicitly states that based on your gender, orientation, race, class, you may not be discriminated against. However, a lot of our rights are on paper, but implementation is the issue, frankly.
So let's say in the context of culture, religion, and the law, which should a person feel like they can always approach or they can always find solidarity in?
I would say the law, because the law allows us to all have different religions and it allows us to be ourselves. So if just because somebody else believes that, being gay is wrong, doesn't mean that now I can't express myself as a gay person, So I feel like in this country that we live in, law trumps everything.
Simon, what's the one thing that you'd like to tell the young boy out there in a rural area, who happens to be a little bit feminine? What's the one thing that you'd like to tell the young girl who might walk a bit more masculine? What's that one thing that you believe those young individuals can actually have some form of hope for or some form of solace in when looking at the Constitution?
Okay. I don't know, personally I just say that it is okay to be you. There is nothing wrong with being the way that you are, and just as everybody else has the right to be themselves, you also have just as much of a right to be you and to exist in any type of way you want, and you should actually take pride in being the way that you are. There should be a sense of pride. Don't let anybody stop you if you can. Don't let anybody stop, because there are those barriers. Sometimes the barriers are family members, sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's structures like your schooling environment, your place of worship, or workplaces, or even your modes of transport. But it's okay to be you, and don't be afraid to take up space as yourself. And there are laws, remember, there are laws that say you have to be yourself, or not necessarily you have to be yourself, but there are laws that protect you in the process of you being yourself, and there are people who will be there for you should you need them.
Those people who are ignorant, they need to realize that simply because you do not agree with something, you cannot look at some other person and feel like they're not worth it. Every human being deserves human worth and dignity. And that shouldn't be determined by who they are or who they classify themselves as.
Thank you so much. And that was very, very powerful. We definitely have to have the discussion, and hopefully the Say Amandla project can be an initiator of these discussions. And On that note, I'd like to thank you very much for coming through and helping us with the Say Amandla project. I am Dumiso on behalf of the Say Amandla LGBTI clinic group under the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. Thank you.